Hi, good evening, everyone. Good evening, Europe. Good morning, America. Hello, I'm Anand, and I am together with Kritika. We welcome you all to Sambash Lockdown Lecture Series. Sambash is an open community of like minded Indians from different spheres of life, from IT to accounting, from student to professors to retired seniors living in Europe. We come together to discuss the real Indian cash, culture, art, societal issues, and histories. We help our followers develop a better understanding of Indian culture, and today it will be understand India's economic condition post COVID. With this, I'm going to hand over to Kritika, who is going to talk about the motivation for the talk.
So many things seem to be going wrong in the world. First, the global trade wars, then COVID, and now world's most powerful nation is up in protest. It's tempting to throw up your hands in despair. We hear immigration is out of control. We hear imposing high import taxes on goods will cause the economy to plummet. We hear saving the environment means sacrificing people's jobs. But if we don't, we will all become extinct, don't we? These are some of the most horrifying cacophony of doomsday scenarios. And what makes it worse is that we often don't know whom to believe. Instead of engaging in substantial debate, politicians seem to be screaming over each other. Amid the hubbub, we occasionally see economists popping on TV and podcasts making dire predictions. Criticizing each other's policy, economists seem intrinsically partial, aligned to their business interest or a certain political ideology. As a layperson, we don't always understand what they do and how they reach to their conclusions. To make matters worse, the opinions of academic economists seem to be counterintuitive and at times illogical because their views don't match up to what the politicians tell us. The fact is that people don't trust economists, and this is a problem. Why? Because only they can give us important information about how to solve some of the world's most critical problems. That's why we are here today. Aren't we, Anand?
Yes, of course. With that, I'm going to introduce today's our guest, Dr. Srinivas Thiruvadanthai, Director of Research at Jerome Levi Forecasting Center, a frequent guest on Bloomberg TV and radio, author for FT Alphaville Asian Age, and co-authored co-eds for The Guardian and Live Mint, and a contributor to SwarajMag.com. Welcome, sir, to Sambash Lecture Series.
Thank you so much, Anand. Thank you, Kritika. Thank you for having me.
I will just jump directly to the first question. My first question is regarding the 20 lakh crore stimulus package. Out of 20 lakh crore stimulus package, it seems 10% is of total stimulus package or in forms of direct grants, and the rest of them are in the form of loan. How do you explain this, sir?
Right. And so if you look around the world, it's in a lot of places, you have the same mix. So not exactly the same proportions, but the total stimulus package, even in Europe, where they claim it is bigger, you'll see that most of the stimulus, a lot of the stimulus is in the form of loans, UK and in most of Europe, right? The US is the only place which is different in the sense that the grants are a very big part of it. Although they also have loans, but the loans are not unimportant. I mean, ideally, you would want everything in grants in an ideal world, but there are limitations. Okay, so the loans, you have to keep in mind that under the current circumstances, many of the entities that are being given loans, whether it is small and medium-sized businesses or whether it is individuals or whether it is even larger businesses that are being given loans under the circumstances, are entities that would not be able to get a loan otherwise because of the loss in their businesses, because of the lack of cash flow, and because lenders who are very, very risk averse, they're not going to banks and others are not going to lend. So giving loans is an important part. In an ideal world, we would have wanted a bigger mix of grants versus loans, but we should not deride the loan quantity. Loans are important.
Yeah, thank you, sir. That really explains the answer. The second question is a counter question for the first question. It's regarding the cautious spending. So
Right.
if the above statement is true, which is definitely true, we have minimum impact on the physical cost estimated at about 1% of the GDP. Did the government got it right in terms of not spending all their ammunition at one go?
Not really. I mean, I have been saying this for many years. I mean, the Indian government, and in general, I've been a supporter of the government, but it has been much more cautious, way too cautious on fiscal spending, even before COVID, because the government needed to do more, given that we had banking sector problems and the corporate sector had leverage. We had lots of problems that the government spending had to be stronger, even before COVID. And after COVID too, the response I would say is on the more cautious and conservative side. The general experience, the experience of India, if you think about it, people think, oh, India has got a huge debt problem, our fiscal deficit is out of control, and, we are profligate and so on and so forth, just tax and spend. But if you look at India and contrast it to developing countries, which have democracy, so that means people have a say, remember, okay? And, unlike in other places, even the US, for instance, in India, poor people come out to vote a lot, right? So the turnout is big. So a lot of the spending that happens and the fiscal deficit that happens is just pure political pressure, right? To win elections and keep people, so many poor people satisfied, right? That's the reason why you have it. But in that base level pressure that is there, if you look at the actual stance of policy, it is very conservative, generally speaking, most of the time. Okay, it's only because the politics keeps pushing at it. So whenever the political push is not there, the tendency is not to try and do what is needed. So it never follows from macro. What does the macro economy need? That's not how our fiscal policy is made. Our fiscal policy is made like, okay, do we have elections? Do we have to win elections now on one side? Okay. And when that pressure goes away, we immediately start thinking about, oh my God, our deficit is too big, our debt is too big, we need to get it under control. Okay. So, but we never think about what does the macro economy need. Um, but that's part of the democracy. It's how it is. But it is very conservative in that sense.
Okay. Thanks, Srini. The next question is about the recovery path. Let us do a Keynesian law debate. The
Right.
Keynesian economics advocates for increased government expenditures, lower taxes to stimulate demand, and thus pull the global economy out of depression. What is your path on what our path of recovery should be? And doesn't this sound like an opportunity for India to develop its own model?
I think these are the key ingredients for India as well. I mean, now, no, none of these models actually I mean, the word Keynesian has become badly used in so many ways. I consider myself a Keynesian, but I am an old school Keynesian, not the modern Keynesians whose views are very different, and I do not think the word Keynes should be used with them. But I don't want to get into an economics lecture of ideologies here. But the basic idea is simple enough, right? When you have a recession, people lose income, so they are incapable of spending, and that's not when you want them to go and take credit. I mean, when you have lost a job, you tell them, hey, I'm going to give you a cheaper loan. Are you going to go and take the loan and buy the car? And same with businesses, right? They are experiencing 20-30% decline in business. You're telling them, hey, you know what? I'm going to give you a subsidized loan. Why don't you go and hire people? Why don't you go and expand? They are not selling. Why would they expand? So that's when the idea that government steps in by spending more to fill the gap in demand and by giving people money, outright grants. That's the difference between grants and loans. Outright money so that they can spend. So that's why that's the basic logic, and it's not anything complicated. Now within that, of course, what can we do in India which is different? And there are lots of other micro issues in India that are more complicated. Like for instance, in India, the part of the problem comes from that, with the IT boom and outsourcing and all that stuff, what we created was the upper level middle class, right? So we created 100, 150, maybe 150 million people in the upper to upper middle class demand, right? So those who can buy cars and two-wheelers and things like that. But what we have not done is the bottom billion, right? we have not created consumers out of them. That's the real challenge. And the problem is most of the stuff that we produce is too expensive for that bottom billion. So what happens is they tend to buy, whether it's Chinese made products or Bangladesh made products, even textiles, our costs are high. So that most of that demand tends to get made elsewhere. So what we need to be able to bridge the gap between, can we make things for ourselves, for our own markets? Okay, which now people are saying, oh, it should be protectionist. That's not the point. Only if you make it yourself for your own markets, you're also creating the income to satisfy the demand. Otherwise, okay, these people have very low income, but they're spending the money on goods made elsewhere. That income is not flowing back into our own country, creating more incomes for other people. That's the main problem. And that challenge is where we are right now. It's a difficult challenge.
Thanks, Srini sir. That was very well explained again. The next one is about the unemployment. Most households are becoming single income in wake of fear arising from coronavirus. Young job seekers and women job seekers are most impacted. Center for Monitoring Indian Economy has estimated that 100 million jobs have been lost due to COVID crisis. Labor force is scared. Industrial production is hit. How can we get back on track? In one of the recent talks given by Dr. Subramaniam, unemployment rate will reach 40%. Similarly, Starkey predictions are made about percentage increase of people under poverty line. Is India's pre-existing conditions on labor market coming to haunt us now? How do you see it?
Very good question. First, about the CMI data, there is a little bit of controversy about the CMI data. I wouldn't take that data at face value. Okay, there is lots of written on it. I don't want to get into a data and debate here. Look, all economic data have to be taken with a large grain of salt, because remember, there is all data collection issues all the time. Okay, so when people present some data as the gospel truth, be always careful. Okay, number one. For a developing country, India's data is actually fairly good. So still, it's, remember, this country is changing rapidly, okay? And our data collection and methodology and surveys are always outdated. They're always trying to catch up, right? And so, but let's say the unemployment rate is clearly high, regardless of what the actual number is. Obviously there are lots of migrant people who have lost their jobs. We know that. We know that for sure, right? So we know that there is a big unemployment problem without actually putting a number at it. And you can also see part of the problem comes from the fact that we also have an informal labor market, right? So most of our labor laws are for the top 10% of the labor market. Most of our workers, 90% of the people, are not protected by those things, right? Whether it is household workers or people who work in restaurants, or people who work on a daily wage, construction workers, they are not, none of these people are covered. And that's why you have this migrant crisis, because there's no protection for them, really, right? And it's also limited by our capacity, right? I mean, we are not a rich country like the US. So what the US did was give out a huge amount of unemployment benefits to anybody who got laid off. In fact, 70% of the people who lost their jobs during COVID in the US are getting more money than they were earning when they were working. They're getting more unemployment benefit than they were earning when they were working. I mean, India cannot afford to give that kind of a thing. Obviously, it's not feasible. The US can do it because it's the reserve currency. That said, could we have done a little bit more? Possibly. And I haven't looked at that particular arithmetic. We could have done more. And part of this comes back to people not being in the formal sector. It would have been easier to deal with it by giving it directly dealing with companies, which are smaller entities, right? And we have done some through the cash transfer to rural households and below poverty line households. We have done some. Partly it has also been challenged by the fact that, again, if we had a complete link of Aadhaar and ration cards and everything together, then it would have been easier to tackle and give to all the households. It would have been possible to do it, but these are things that we are learning as we go by. Did I answer your question? I think I I'm not sure now what the
Yes, yes, of
Yes,
course you have answered. Yeah, definitely yes.
thank you very much. Moving on to the next question on non-asset risks.
Mhm.
We have two risks at hand. One is the economic crisis, which is destroying our livelihood. And the second crisis is the health crisis, which is threatening our lives. These twin crises are deeply intertwined. Based upon this, Moody's stated that the stimulus package is likely to ease asset risk, but is not enough to offset the negative impact of coronavirus lockdown, of course. What's your view?
Yes, I think it is not enough. It's clear because the damage is. You see, the thing is, if you compare other countries in the world, India's lockdown is actually the most severe. Okay, whether it's been effective or not, we can debate that question. But it was in terms of the actual uh, stoppage of activity, it was one of the most severe. Right. On the other hand, our fiscal support package has not been the most generous, right? So that's why we are in this situation where you've stopped activity, but you've not given enough to help all those people who have lost incomes and jobs. And partly that reflects the fact that both of these actually actions reflect the fact that we are a country that doesn't have enough capacity, bureaucratic and administrative capacity, to deal with. In an ideal world, we could have done what Japan has done, right? Which is the least lockdown, but achieve, tremendously good results. That reflects the social and cultural modes in Japan. People wear masks, people are more disciplined. You can say all those things. The thing is, Indians have also been disciplined. It's almost fashionable to say, oh, Indians are not disciplined, say all these things. But if you look at it, by and large, Indians have been very, very disciplined. The problem is, when you have a billion and three people, 300 million people, all you need is a few million people to be undisciplined. And this corona is such a thing that, it all took was that one thing in that vegetable market in Chennai, in Tamil Nadu. Until then, things were coming under control in Chennai very, very well. And, the whole thing went, went bonkers, right? So it's, the part of the problem is we don't have the administrative capacity nor the monetary capacity to do test and trace in an extensive way that some of these countries have done. Number one, nor do we have that kind of social cohesion that Korea and Japan, what they have been able to do. Number two is we don't have the fiscal capacity to do what the US does. Now, US also has not done a great job administratively, if you really think about it, right? I mean, for a rich country, the viruses it has not gone down. It started to rise again, right? So let's be realistic about what was possible given the circumstances. And I think, yes, we should try to aspire for better things for sure. But I think, given the circumstances, this is actually not as bad as things could have been. That's an optimistic view to take, way to look at it.
What would be your score for India's report card then?
I think it is score is 6 on 10 or maybe 7 on 10, in fact. I mean, I do think that we have to recognize what the challenges are. I mean, you guys are all young. I mean, I'll tell you, in the 1970s, I grew up in the 70s, right? There was a cyclone in Andhra Pradesh and Orissa, 1977, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was 77. I think tens and thousands of people died in that. Okay, and it was not as severe as what we had this time, the latest one. And how many people died? Think about it, right? We've come a long way. Let's put it this way. Okay, we've come a long way. And for all the migrant crisis and all that the people are talking about, we used to have even 20, 30 years back. I remember the Kalahandi in the 80s or something. They had the famine. People died. Hundreds of people died in famine. We don't have that even amongst this kind of distress, even among so many people losing their job. Yes, there are human interest stories, and I don't want to downplay them. I don't want to say that anybody's distress is something that we should downplay. Absolutely not. Okay. That said, I also want to make sure that we don't think that these are what so sometimes when we say these things, okay, is he downplaying? Oh, he's just poo-pooing the people's distress. That's not what I'm doing. I'm just saying, look at what has been achieved compared to where it used to be when we used to have previous humanitarian crisis, right? So that's all I'm trying to say. I don't want to say that all the distress of the farm laborers are what I mean the migrant labor. I don't want to dismiss their concerns. I certainly completely aware that there is a lot of distress there.
Yeah, thank you. I also agree that India has been improving consistently over the period of time. My next question is for the sector. I think it's regarding the banking sector, which has been in talks for a while. So, in the banking sector, not so long before we were busy fathoming the yes bank crisis. Now, with COVID, all banks are edging towards a liquidity problem as there is no income for some of us in the last 3 months. But with the spending still on, banks might get into a solvency issue. Is the future bleak for the Indian banking sector? What's your opinion, sir?
I mean, just one second. Sorry. Sorry, I apologize. And so yeah, I mean, so look, the banking crisis has been evolving since 2013 when it was first flagged by I think Ashish Gupta of Credit Suisse. He was the person who first flagged it, and then Raghuram Rajan started talking about it. And since then the banking crisis has been slowly evolving. The problem is we did not tackle it all banking crisis. History tells us that if you let it fester, it becomes terrible. Okay, you have to take forceful actions once you recognize the problem to take it back. Now, there is a reason why we did not take forceful action immediately in India, and the reason why we did not do that in India is because if we do that, then we go back to doing all the bad things that we used to do. Again, make those bad loans, again, make those things, which is what we always typically do, right? I mean, banks are in trouble, the government bails them out, and then we go back to making bad loans, loan mailers, all those things. So there was a reason why the government wanted to hold the banks to their feet to the fire, to keep on the pressure on them to reform their ways, right? So that's where the politics comes, interferes with optimal economic policy, because we also are trying to solve a political problem at the same time. It's hard to do those things. So we came into 2019, into COVID, with a banking sector that was still very, very shaky, right? And obviously, COVID has been a blow. But what RBI has done is RBI has given tremendous liquidity support. This is why I tweeted today that RBI under Das has done a very good job. So I think they will be okay. Okay, eventually they will be okay. They will need to get more capital infusion. The government will come and do that. They already have done some, but they will do more. And I think it will take another couple of years, but the banking system will settle down. I think the RBI is doing what is needed. I don't think there is anything to worry about that from that regard.
Do you think that we need to write off all our NPAs at the moment? This is the right time to do that? Do you think so?
We have already been doing a lot of NPA write-downs. If you look at it aggressively, we've written down. So we would need to be writing down even more in the wake of COVID. So yes, and this is the time. I think it's gone on long enough that we take this opportunity, write it all off, clean the bank's balance sheet, and recapitalize them. I think they have taken some steps, and they will do more. I think I'm optimistic that they will do more as the conditions progress.
The next question is about the manufacturing sector. And I also have an audience question that I will have to ask. So you'll have to wait a while. It's a long one. So today in India, close to half the population is still employed in agriculture, contributing to 18% of our GDP. In comparison with US, it's only 2% of the population employed, contributing to 5.4% of the GDP. So do you think post-COVID, it would be the right time for the government to shift from the primary sector to manufacturing? In other words, what steps should government take to make India as a manufacturing hub alongside China? Apart from the various economic package, package which we have is good for the initial captivation, but what and how do we endure this in the long run? And do you think India can take a strategic decision of intruding into the dual currency, one for internal and one for the world, to attract cheaper exports? Will that help the sector? The audience question, again about labor laws, is do you think there is a problem with lack of good labor skills and labor laws that is impeding the sector of manufacturing? And is it at all possible to catch up with China?
Okay, so very good question. So if you look back at it, even at the time of independence, these were the same things we were thinking. How do we take an agricultural economy and get our own industrial revolution, right? How do we move from an agricultural economy, have our industrial revolution, which other countries had 200 years before, or Japan had it, and Soviet Union. So those questions, unfortunately, it is such an unfortunate state of affairs. 70 years afterwards, we still have the same questions. How do we move people from agriculture to industry? In the meantime, we did move a lot of people from agriculture to service sector. So we somehow bypassed that whole industrial thing, right? And see, there are several reasons for why this has not happened. It's a very complicated thing, and I don't think I have all the answers. The labor laws are certainly one of them, but labor law is not the only thing, but it is a significant part of it. And easing the labor laws will certainly help. The problem is it's not just a labor law. We have multiplicity of laws, okay, and multiplicity of inspections. We have just so many. I mean, somebody was telling me like we have 300. If you include the state, local, and everything, there are so many inspection requirements or clearance requirements before you set up something, and even after you have set up something. So that's what creates a big hurdle. Okay, and these are not all necessarily related to labor, but there are other issues as well, right? So that's one of the aspects. The second is the size of the business, and even after easing these things, we still have some size restrictions, right? With small businesses, what qualifies it? We have eased them, so that's a good step. So we have those restrictions, right? The third thing is, remember, we are a democracy. So whatever we do, whatever China does, whatever Bangladesh does, Bangladesh is technically a democracy, but it's nothing like ours. Okay, what Bangladesh does or Vietnam does cannot compare with what is feasible in India. Okay, remember, in India, for all the talk about dissent and everything, lack of dissent, there is a civil society. And if you have anything like, you have a factory where there is a fire and 200 people die, what do you think is going to happen to that? You can see how much we closed the Sterlite plant, right? Remember, a few years ago. So this is not to say that you can only have manufacturing with labor abuse, okay? But most countries, okay, in their early industrial phase, right, had a lot of what economists call labor repression, okay, basically exploitation of labor and a lot of labor laws that were simply not there, right? Back then, there were no such labor laws. And in India, it's not just a labor law. As I said, it's a democracy with a free press. So even if you had no labor laws whatsoever, it's not clear that you can get away with doing that kind of stuff. Okay, you can get away with doing that kind of stuff at a micro level, right? Somebody runs a small shop, they abuse their labor, they can get away with it because it's not big enough to create news. But somebody runs, let's say some multinational company runs a major factory somewhere, and that factory has a fire. I mean, some few years ago that happened in Bangladesh, right? Nobody would even know about this, right? I mean, so then what happens? Okay, that's number one. Number two, Indian people they're fairly independent minded. To some extent, manufacturing is about regimentation. It is, as opposed to service jobs, it is much more about regimentation. And people resist that. One of the things that they resist also is, if you look at textile in particular, right? Both in Japan in the 1920s, 30s, and Japanese industry was growing, and then in Bangladesh now and Vietnam, and in China too, it's a huge proportion of young women working in that. Okay, in India, yeah, and what do? They create hostels for them, dormitories for them. So they put them in these dormitories. Okay, so they can control their timing, right? So if you're in a dormitory, the person cannot just be absentee because they are there in your control, right? And the morning, the clock alarm strikes, you can have them work at a particular schedule. And so in India, the big problems are absenteeism, and women resist coming to dormitories because of family reasons or whatever the reasons are, right? So then what happens when you don't have the dormitory is, so tomorrow you have a work schedule and the person doesn't show up. So, and then they will call and say, oh, I had some problems, which all of us can have. I'm not saying that they don't have problems, but the thing is, see, the humanitarian, the democratic, and our cultural aspects, we have to be realistic about what is feasible and what is not feasible, which is not to say we can't achieve a lot, but we can't just compare ourselves to Bangladesh and Vietnam and say, hey, we can do that. We cannot do many of the things that they do.
Yeah, that's a good answer, basically. Yeah, so So do you think that it's also important that we make our export cheaper, compete in competition to China? How we can do that apart from labor reforms?
No, I think we can do that. There are two major costs. One is labor. No, three major costs, labor. But the two other things that we're missing is land and land acquisition costs. In China, it's cheap compared to us. Okay, that's the number one. And the previous governments, the land acquisition law that they passed has made it even more restrictive and more expensive. That's number two, right? And number three is power, electric power, right? See, the problem is not only don't have we a reliable power, because we subsidize consumers, we actually try, the cross subsidization means industry ends up paying more, right? We could not only subsidize consumers, we also subsidize farmers and things like that. So one of the things is we have to rationalize all this power thing, right? And and even within that in power, the cost increase because the power is not reliable. They have to put a generator or something like that, which increases the cost, right? So those are the kind of things that we need to take the basic things, basic cost low. And the fourth thing is cost of capital. Loans are expensive in India. In China, there is much more subsidized loans, right? So if we take those things into account and ease those things, then we can compete. We can certainly compete. It's not lack of capabilities, but then we also have skill development, lack of skills, shortages. There is not enough people. We say we have so many workers. That's our demographic dividend. The fact is we do not have enough skilled workers, right? Because not enough people come from industrial training institutes and go to that kind of a job. Um, I'm going on long, but let me finish on that thought. Part of this also is cultural. Most of us aspire to have desk jobs. I have a desk job. Most of us aspire to have desk jobs, right? In India, that's a big thing. And so people, actually, there's a shortage of carpenters, electricians, and all that stuff, but you don't have enough people graduating from those places, right? My suggestion is, how can we increase the social prestige of those jobs? Actually, they pay well, really. Okay, you can do better with those jobs than some of the other jobs that people do. Okay, but the point is, people don't look at that as a socially prestigious thing. I think the prime minister, ministers, and other people should go and do the convocation in these places instead of going to convocation and doing it in IIT, which already has got a prestige. Why? What are you gaining by doing that? I mean, I don't see any benefit to that.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. I think definitely. Moving on to the next question. Thanks for answering this. In detail. It's about the agriculture reform from the manufacturing hub. We saw that a lot of reforms has been announced by the government, and the last three reforms was particularly about the agri-market reforms. And do you think the government finally bites the bullet with one of the new reforms to give farmers the option to choose the market where they want to sell their produce by removing interstate trade barriers and providing e-trade of agriculture produce? How would this impact agriculture? Is it time for entrepreneurship in agriculture sector? Can they maximize this reform? What is your take on this, sir?
Yeah, I think these reforms are good. Number one, okay, because you obviously want if farming is to be not dependent on permanently on the government giving them doles and giving them loan waivers, you have to make it lucrative for them to be able to sell the product where they can sell it, get the maximum price for their output. That you have to make it possible. Okay, so sorry, excuse me for a minute. Sorry, I apologize. But if you look at what the farming sector has to be doing ultimately is has to be able to create value-added products, more value-added products, right? We have a lot of wastage and things like that, partly because we don't have adequate storage facilities, adequate transportation facilities, and also adequate processing facilities, right? So if you look at the US, for instance, you go to the store, you'll see, there's this canned tomato, canned this one, canned that, everything is there, right? There's number one. Number two, there is tremendous storage facilities so that, you can have the thing stored for months together and then sell it, right? So that obviously is a big thing. Now, these are things that we have taken a lot of steps. First of all, we have created better infrastructure so you can get from the farm to the city better. So clearly, roads compared to when I used to grow up, roads are far better. There's no comparison. Can it be improved? Sure, it can be. And we have to keep doing that. So the farm sector reforms are important because if it makes farming more lucrative, then it reduces the constant dependence on government donors. Number one. Number two, you have to also if you're going to make it commercially viable and competitive thing, you obviously have to remove the interstate barriers. See, the thing is, India, we consider ourselves the united country, but until GST came, it was actually not a unified market. It was not a unified market because you had to go from one state to the other. You had to pay octroi, you had to pay this, that. I mean, with the interstate tax, you had to pay octroi in the city when you were getting to the city limit. It's just a mess. I mean, I remember when I was doing summer training, this long back in ICI Paint in Chennai at the time. And we were doing the inventory and warehouse planning for the southern zone, right? So we had some warehouses in Cochin and one in the Coimbatore and Madurai and so on and so forth. So when I was from grad school and I didn't obviously have real life experience and I was doing all the mathematical stuff and I was looking at, hey, we should move this from this. I said, no, you can't do that. You have to pay 4% tax here. I mean, I can't do that. And then you can imagine this is within a company. You're moving from one warehouse to the other. You just imagine how all the kinds of the restrictions that were there. Clearly, we have moved away from that, and we are doing that with the new agricultural reforms as well. So finally, we are not only have a unified country, we have a unified market. The benefits of unified country, we are starting to realize that.
That really makes sense. I mean, we are living in European Union, where we are talking about so many 26 countries at least having one free market, and then it's incredible that 26 states cannot make up their mind together. So, all right, moving on to IT sector. NASSCOM President Devjani Ghosh, recently said that the impact on the BPM sector can be absorbed by just changing in portfolio and reskilling of the people, which can just get the 191 billion INR industry to rebound. What's your take? Should we be so upbeat and optimistic about the IT sector, which depends up to 70% of its revenue from EU and US markets?
I think yes, because if you really think about what's happening, first of all, they've tightened the visa restrictions in the US, and they're going to make it harder and harder to get H-1Bs and eventually green cards too, right? I mean, look, there are people on green cards. I think they're with private dates, and you guys are in Europe, so probably not aware of the system. But it takes a long time to get a green card now, and just the wait has become longer and longer, right? So, the point is, does the US produce enough workers? People will tell you, yes, we do, but that's not really the fact. If they did that, then they wouldn't be hiring these people. It is expensive to hire. Why do they hire them? I mean, it's not like businesses are, now if they paid them more, maybe they will come. But look, that's not how things operate. There is the emphasis on US education is a lot towards the liberal arts, less towards the computer tech, right? And so, plus COVID, what it's going to do is work from home. It's going to accelerate that shift. It's not like, okay, we are going to be working from home, okay, from now. That's not going to happen. We'll go back towards where we were normal. But the trend that was already happening in IT, a lot of people were already been in the last 20 years, working from home with some flexible schedules, right? But that trend is going to accelerate, clearly going to accelerate, because people realize it can be done, okay, and it is going to happen, okay. So that also actually benefits India, because if you're working from home, what does it matter? Why would you want to be here in Europe or the US versus putting the job somewhere there? In fact, even why would you want to be in a major city in India? If you look at Vembu Sridhar, who is of Zoho, who has been quite revolutionary in this, he has his latest development center in Tenkasi. He's moved all the way from San Francisco to Tenkasi. He's not even in Tenkasi, he's in a village near Tenkasi. So if you look at him, he's like wearing his veshti, and he's in morning in the village and in sylvan surroundings and doing his work, So I think it can be, I think yes, we will, I'm optimistic on that.
So for we IT Walas, it could be a dream.
Yes.
To go back. We could actually go back.
Yes. And you don't even need to live in Chennai. Why? I mean, look, Yeah, the thing is, in the past, if you lived in in a village, right? I mean, I grew up in the city. I'm a city bred person, but I know I used to go back to my grandparents' place in the village. You to go there, and the thing is, it's very boring, right? Well, what am I going to do? There's nobody around here, and there's nothing to do. But now with the internet, there's not much to be bored about, right? You can play chess, you can play bridge, you can play anything on the internet, and you have all the things to browse. You have the entire world as a library here, right? And so it's not like in the past, and you enjoy all the benefits of rural life, which is nice air, nice environment, festivals, and all that stuff.
You mentioned bridge. It's you were the national champion for under 21 for bridge.
Yes, come
Nice.
back.
All right. We have some audience questions before we go to the last question. We would like to tackle those. So, first question asked by Mr. Satanathan is more than 80% of migrants sent back home from TN. How will the services industry resolve this?
Yeah, this is going to be a challenge in the sense that we have to create enough confidence to bring them back again, right? That is going to be a challenge. And especially in TN, it is a big challenge because there is so much migrant labor, not just in Chennai, across the state, right? I mean, I go back to Chennai and I look at it and I'm seeing every time I go to some place, whether it's Sangeeta or Adyar Anand Bhavan or somewhere, I see all these North Indian guys speaking in Hindi. I mean, I speak Hindi fluently, so I didn't have a problem. But I'm saying, what's this? I mean, this was never the case when I was, in college in Chennai. I never experienced this. You would rarely see any North Indian in Chennai, right? It has radically changed. When you go to all the beauty parlors, there's a lot of Northeasterners working there. But even in deep hinterlands, you have even agricultural labor from the north, right? So, and so we need that. Chennai has the Scandinavian levels of fertility rate. So we are producing, not replacing the population. In TN, I think the fertility rate is below 1.7 right now. So we need those workers regardless of what it is. So I think COVID has done a little bit of damage, and it will take a little bit of confidence boosting before they come back. Ultimately, the fact is what drives migrant labor is wages. Wages are there, livelihood is there. If the livelihood and wages are not there back in Bihar or UP or wherever they are coming from, or Orissa, they will come. They will come. But the real, but the other side is if they don't come, it means that they have better livelihoods there. It may be a problem for TN, it's not a problem for India. Right? I mean, if UP is creating enough jobs and people from there don't need to come, then it's not a problem for India. It's a problem for Tamil Nadu.
Okay, true.
Yes.
Anand, would you like to take the next question, audience question? Um,
Yes, it's a more of a political question here. It's from Subramaniam, and he wants to know what's your take on Dr. Swami SFM?
FF, no opinion.
Okay, then I'll take the next one. Europe is planning to open the travel for tourists soon. Do you think they can compensate for the loss? Europe is still a dreamland for Indian tourists. Will that improve spending?
So think about it this way. So Europe opens up tourists. So the question is, are Indians ready to fly? I don't think so. I don't think anybody is ready to fly right now. And even if Europe opens it up, they have only opened it up only internally so far, right? They are not going to open up and say, hey, people from all other countries come, regardless of your COVID situation, right? And if they say that, oh, but you will be tested in the airport and will take 6 hours of wait or 2 days of quarantine. Imagine I'm going to take a vacation and I go there and I'm quarantined for 14 days. How would I feel? Okay. And then I come back and I'm quarantined. You want to go for vacation for fun, not to take more stress. You want to de-stress. If you're taking more stress, why the hell would you want to go? I
Okay, I
think it
think,
take a long time to come back.
sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Then I will just read my question. So this question is regarding the new sectors. So the new and emerging sectors, I would say. Uh, while India responded fairly well in its innovation and delivery, be it COVID test kits or COVID vaccine development, Should now India look at developing or inaugurating newer sectors in the Ministry of Ayush? For example, in the area of prevention of disease with benefits of turmeric ginger latte, meditation, Surya Namaskaram, which is taking center stage across the globe, can we create new sectors like music tourism, Ayurveda tourism, like around Margari Utsavam, learning Kalaripayattu, Kalambam as a part of keeping fit, a sector that focuses on prevention side of the disease. Another sector is education, build digital literacy course that will bridge the generation gap as this will help traditional artisans monetize through a global reach. What do you think on this, sir?
Oh, yeah, these are excellent questions and some very good ideas. I think partly, the problem is mostly our traditions were kept alive because we pass it from generation to generation, right? What I see is that many of those traditions are falling away because we are not. See, India, the beauty of the thing is it didn't depend on any top down or centralized control. Everything was decentralized because the families passed traditions on, right? Whether it is, festivals or whether it is food and, these kind of things, right? The problem is much of that is getting lost now. Like I look at myself, compare myself to my parents and my grandparents, right? Um, and I am not passing any of those things because I don't know for whatever reason I'm probably lax, but and when I was growing up, my mother doesn't believe much in this Western medicine. My father is a big believer in Western medicine. My mother is like the opposite. So whenever some cold or something comes, her natural tendency is not to take some Vicks or any other medicine, but to go and find some, kashayam or something to make for that, right? Or manjal or something, or if it's for everything, she has something which she has learned from her grandmother or grandfather, wherever she learned from, and in living in a village, right? Hardly when you come to the urban surroundings, you start losing that, and we have lost that. That's the real problem. So that now we need a top-down solution to actually prevent the loss of knowledge that comes, right? All the Ayurvedic home remedies that we have had, whether it's castor oil, oil bath, all those things, we have to make sure that we don't lose all that, right? That's more important than even making an industry out of it, which we should, certainly. Of course, we should do that. The second thing is on the artisans. Yes, certainly the internet is again a great tool for teaching, for reviving arts and culture, and for people to learn these things through. And some innovative solution should be found. My son, for instance, his second son has been learning Carnatic for the last 10, 12 years from a person who teaches from Bangalore, from Skype. He has never actually been to her house or seen her face to face. I mean, except over Skype, and he has done it. I mean, he's fairly accomplished, and he's been able to do that without actually being there. And so, I can see why the potentiality for doing all those things. And with Ayurvedam, I'll tell you, I have with my own experiences with health issues, not my own, but with family members or others, I have found that there are some things for which Western medicine is absolutely indispensable, right? If I have to do a surgery, I have to do a surgery. I have no choice. Okay. But for many other things, for the restorative healing processes, doesn't work very well at all. Okay. In fact, it probably sometimes compounds the problem. Okay. And some of our medicines do actually work because they've been tested out by experience of 5,000 years or whatever the number of years, right? And it's not experience and experimentation across millions of people, right? Some of these things, and people are now discovering, oh, turmeric has got this quality, carcinogenic quality, and I go to the local store here, Trader Joe's. You can see curcumin, this not cumin, sorry, turmeric, anti-carcinogen or some such thing. They sell all that turmeric latte and all that stuff. Yes, we can certainly do a better job of marketing it. In fact, we have done to some extent, what's his name, that Ramdev, he's been pretty successful, at least internally doing the marketing part of it. Now, globally, it's a separate matter, but at least let's do it internally before, let's do it internally first.
So yeah, definitely. So in that case, that what is more important now to be having a better trade deficit or trade deficit is important or a physical deficit is important? I think it's a different question basically.
No, I think, look, there are two things, right? The trade deficit is important because there are some things for which we have to pay to buy things, right? Oil, for instance. We don't produce 80-90% of our oil is imported. There is, and unless we find some huge amounts of oil, which I don't think we will, we'll continue to import oil for the foreseeable future, right? So as long as we are doing that, we do need to be able to export stuff to be able to pay for the basic necessities, at least at the very need, very much. So the trade deficit, we can't have the trade deficit explode because we need to be able to pay for the trade deficit with foreign currency, which we can't print. We can't print dollars, and they don't accept rupees, right, as a payment. The fiscal deficit, the issue is this. Fiscal deficit is ultimately we print our own currency. So we can, it's not a problem insofar as printing the currency goes. The problem is always that will it lead to inflation? Okay, if printing more money is going to lead to inflation, or is it going to lead to more trade deficit? In which case it will lead to. So those are the two problems that we have to focus on. And right now, neither of those are issues. That's why I keep saying the fiscal deficit is not a problem, because right now that's not an issue. That's not an issue in the immediate future because inflation is fairly well controlled and well contained. And the trade deficit is also low, but thanks to oil prices having come down a lot. So we are in good shape. So I don't think we should be, the both are concerns, but neither of them are concerns right now.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Another political question coming in. What do you think is our non-performant assets getting down in NDA compared to UPA? Is it getting better in Modi's regime?
Well, I mean, look, I think historically, and I worked in ICICI long back. So ICICI at that time was not a bank. It was not a consumer bank. It was what is called industrial credit. The name is Industrial Credit and Investment Corporation, right? It was for making project loans for businesses, for making money for putting up projects, right? So the general idea of India and lending is there has never been a great amount of discipline in lending in India. But the basic thing is, the idea was we always grew fast enough that you grew out of your problems. Okay, so you always grew out of your problems. The problem, what happened in the last 7-8 years, is we have not grown out of our problems. Partly because people will blame the growth. That's true, but it's not just the growth. The thing is that behavior was so, because we have grown out of our problems, we took that and turbocharged it, especially from 2005 to 2011. Our lending just exploded. I've put some charts on Twitter in the past. It was just what I called an orgy of lending. Okay, I don't know whether it is political or non-political. I don't want to get into that, whether it is political or not. The fact is there was indiscriminate and incredible amount of lending so in that period. Okay, and we are still digesting that. That's the real problem. That excess. If you look at all those things that were put up back then, SR and all of these things, right? That's what we are still digesting. And a lot of these were loans taken by companies that were putting in commodities, and they thought the commodity prices will keep going up because oil was at 140, if you remember. And now when commodity prices have collapsed, many of these businesses are not viable. But that's not the only thing. They were all projecting the growth, that fabulous growth that we had from 2003 to 2004 to 2009. They thought that that's going to continue forever, right? So when you project that kind of a growth, you also start to take more risk, right? Because you can grow into the problem, right? But then suddenly growth falls off and you are left way behind now, right? And that's part of the problem. And we are digesting that. It's taken us a long time. Maybe we could have done a faster job of doing it, but those are, as I said, it's a political issue of doing it. But we certainly are paying for the problems that were created during that time.
That's really well explained, I would say. Yeah. So we have more audience questions. The other audience question we have is about the affordable housing. So it's about the real estate. Cities like Mumbai housing process are falling drastically, also accompanied huge pileup of inventory. India still has a huge middle class who cannot afford housing. So what do you think on that point?
That is a travesty. That's one of the major things. I've always said that two things that hold back development is huge real estate prices. Because think about this, right? If you're spending your lifetime trying to own an apartment, right? And number one. Number two is think about all the businesses. Any city thrives from all the business, not just manufacturing, all the small businesses that run, whether it is a yoga studio, restaurant, small shop, all those the karate classes. You need a space. You have to pay rent, right? If the real estate cost is prohibitive, it inhibits the growth of those kind of businesses. It inhibits the vibrancy of all the place. So the real estate cost is a killer, and real estate prices coming down is very good. Low real estate prices are the biggest boon that you can have. The problem is most people who have taken loans and bought prices at high prices want those prices to be remain high. Otherwise, they feel like they're in trouble, right? If they have to sell it and they don't have enough. That's true. But that's an individual problem. And it is a collective problem to the extent that banks have made those loans and they can't satisfy them. But real estate prices coming down itself is a good foundation for a long-term prosperity, because high real estate prices are not a sign of prosperity, they are a sign of problem. Low real estate price, but I should be able to afford a house, that's the sign of prosperity, that people can afford their houses. In fact, that is the case in the US too. US's houses are fairly affordable, but if you go compared to India, but if you go 30, 40, 50 years back and you compare it to today, houses have become progressively more unaffordable. You could easily afford a house in the US in the past, or most places, not in New York, which is an expensive place, for a year's salary or something like that. Median year's salary would afford a house. That 1 year's salary or 2 years salary at most. You could be able to. That's how it used to be, right? So people used to get out of high school, work for a couple of years, and 22 they got married and they moved to a house. That was no longer possible in the US. But in India, it's absurd. India and China, the prices of houses are absurd. That's not how that's not how a vibrant economy is. If you're thinking about very basic need like housing all the time, then how can you call yourself prosperous?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've lived in a I started my career from Mumbai, and my God, I don't want to go back.
I know.
Yes. We have another question, which is again an audience question on demonetization and issue of black money with COVID crisis. Is there going to be a change in the fast capital appreciation? Then how do we balance that with the influx of NRI investment in Indian real estate?
Good question. So let me try to answer the black money. I don't know whether demonetization solves that, but eventually we will, between GST and as the economy becomes more formalized, right, and we have more transactions, the problem will come down. It will not go away, because there's still most of the black money is generated via bribes and things like that. Those things are still there. I mean, they're not completely gone. They have come down. Yeah, not as bad. Again, if I remember going back to the 70s and 80s, compared to that, I feel like things are better. I'm not 100% sure that they're better because I'm not always at the ground level in India. But back then, for everything you have to get a driver's license, you have to get passport. It just takes a long time. Nowadays, you can get it fairly quickly and without having to meet anybody. And it seems like a fairly non bribery process. It looks like it, at least to me, outside, looking at it from outside. I don't know. I have not recently applied for it. So, but still, there is high levels of. So, as long as there will be black money. Okay. But the key thing is the electronic movement to electronics and movement to GST is reducing. So, it's a long process, and we have started there. Okay. Insofar as the NRIs buying real estate, I don't know. Are they buying a lot now? I think they are not buying that much. Is it a lot of influx into real estate? I'm not a big fan of, in general, I'm not a fan of restrictions on trade or on capital flows. But as far as real estate is concerned, I am not a big fan of allowing foreigners to buy real estate because you don't want to drive up prices of real estate. Real estate prices is something I do not think should be going up. They should be going down and remain low. That's what I always feel. Okay, I don't like real estate prices to be. I don't think they're a good idea. So we shouldn't be allowing NRIs to buy real estate, or anybody for that matter who's not living in India and working in India to buy real estate.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think that was very appropriately answered again. So, do you think that we need a lot more FDIs with this? I think because you said about the foreign investment a bit.
FPI is both fine. I mean, I do not. A lot of people make a difference between FDI and FPI. In my opinion, although there is some mixed evidence on both, I think both are good. Um, Portfolio investment, foreign portfolio investment, and foreign direct investment both are good. In fact, I think foreign portfolio investment, to the extent that it um, uh, keeps increasing the financialization of our economy and creates more products for even the domestic middle class to invest in instead of gold and real estate. It's good. Ultimately, it's a good idea. I'm not a big distinguish between, there is always FDI is good, FPI is bad. I don't think the evidence is that clear at all. We have managed with a lot of FPI for a long time without having any crisis. We need to have some regulations, in which we do, and RBI has done a very good job on that front.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really good. I would thank you for such a frank and engaging response for all our questions, and invite me to close the session with the Shanti Mantra from Kritika ji.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Also, us, we learned a
That
lot
was
today. Yeah.
pleasure was ours.